Welcome to my channel, The Quiet Observer, where we break down human behavior, psychology, and the patterns most people miss. Now let's get into today's video.
Picture this. You meet someone new at work, through a friend, maybe on an app, and within a few weeks, something feels almost electric about the connection. They remember everything you've ever told them. They text you first. They say things like, "I've never felt this understood by anyone." And the strange thing is, you feel it too. This person gets you in a way other people just haven't. Not yet, anyway. Now here's the question I want you to sit with today. What if that feeling isn't love? What if it isn't even chemistry? What if what you're actually experiencing is the very first, very quiet stage of something psychologists call a trauma bond, and the reason it feels so good is precisely because it's designed to? Welcome back. Today we're not going to talk about the obvious stuff. We're not here to discuss black eyes or screaming matches or dramatic ultimatums. We're going in earlier than that. Much earlier. We're going to look at the quiet red flags, the behaviors that start showing up in week 1 or 2, the ones that don't look like danger signs because they look exactly like love. And then, at the end, I'm going to give you one of the most powerful tools in psychological self-awareness, learning to observe your own life the way a third party would. Let's start at the beginning. The first quiet red flag has a name that sounds almost harmless. It's called hyperdisclosure, and in the early days of a trauma bond, it almost always comes from the person who will eventually become the source of pain, not because they're consciously manipulating you, though sometimes they are, but because it's a pattern that creates intimacy unnaturally fast. Hyperdisclosure is when someone tells you things that are deeply personal, surprisingly vulnerable, or emotionally heavy within hours or days of meeting you. A difficult childhood. A betrayal by an ex. A parent who was never there. Financial shame. Medical history. Sexual trauma. Now, why does this matter? Because when a person shares something painful with you, your brain does something automatic and beautiful. It activates empathy. You lean in. You feel trusted. You feel special. And almost immediately, you begin to feel responsible, in a subtle way, for the emotional weight they've just handed you. Researchers in social psychology call this the reciprocity of vulnerability. Once someone opens up to you, you feel a social and emotional pull to open up in return. And suddenly, within days, you've both shared things you might normally guard for months. The bond feels deep. It feels real. But what it actually is accelerated, and acceleration in intimacy is almost always a warning sign, even when it feels like a gift. The thing about hyper-disclosure is that it bypasses your normal vetting process. In a healthy relationship, trust is earned over time. You share a little, observe how it's held, then share a little more. That gradual process gives you information. It lets you assess whether this person is safe before you've handed them your most tender pieces. Hyper-disclosure skips all of that. It creates the feeling of closeness without the time that genuine closeness requires. Now let's move into the second quiet flag, because it tends to follow the first one almost naturally. Once the rapid intimacy is established, once you've both overshared, once you feel like you really know each other, something subtle begins to shift in the language of the relationship. You start hearing a particular kind of framing. Phrases like, "Nobody else has ever really understood me the way you do." Or, "My family is so toxic, they never get what we have." Or the one that sounds the most romantic of all, "It's just us against the world." This is the beginning of what psychologists call the isolation narrative, and it is one of the most powerful tools in the architecture of a trauma bond. Here's how it works. It starts emotionally, not physically. Nobody takes your phone. Nobody tells you that you can't see your friends. Instead, what happens is that a frame gets built, slowly, gently, in which the relationship becomes the primary container for your emotional life. Other people are gradually described as not getting it. Your friends are painted as a little judgy. Your family is characterized as not being supportive of your happiness. None of this is said with aggression. It's said with pain. It's said in a way that invites you to agree, to validate, to step a little further into the circle of two. And here's the insidious part, because it happens gradually, and because each individual moment sounds so much like closeness and not control, most people don't notice it until they look up one day and realize they've quietly stopped calling certain people. They've stopped mentioning the relationship to their parents as much. They've started self-editing, anticipating how their partner might respond if they mention a night out with a friend. The isolation doesn't look like a cage. It looks like a cocoon. There's a third quiet flag that tends to live right alongside these two, and it's worth naming it directly: the idealization of your uniqueness. This is when the new person in your life communicates, sometimes explicitly, sometimes through 100 small signals, that you are different from everyone else they've ever known. More perceptive. More emotionally intelligent. The only person who truly sees them. You are exceptional, and the relationship you're building is exceptional, and the rest of the world simply won't understand that. This is intoxicating. And it's meant to be. Because when you believe you are uniquely special to this person, you also begin to feel a unique responsibility to them. You become protective of the bond. You become less likely to question it, or to let outside perspectives in. If a friend says I don't know, there's something about them that makes me a little uneasy, you're primed to dismiss it, because you know something they don't. You've been let in a way others haven't. That belief is the very thing that keeps the door to external reality gently but firmly closed. So what does all of this actually feel like from the inside? That's the crucial question, and it's why so many people don't recognize trauma bonding in its early stages. From the inside, it feels like finally. It feels like being found. It feels like someone has reached through all your defenses and actually seen the real you, and they're not running. After years of feeling slightly misunderstood by the world, which is to say, after years of being human, this feels like relief. Like coming home. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between the warmth of genuine safety and the warmth of manufactured intimacy. Both activate the same reward pathways. Both feel like connection. And so the brain learns to associate this particular person, this particular dynamic, with that feeling of relief. And that is, at its core, what a trauma bond is: a neurological and emotional attachment that forms not despite the pain the relationship may eventually contain, but because of the intensity of both the highs and the lows. The groundwork gets laid quietly, in those early weeks, before there's any pain at all. The bond is built first on intensity. The suffering, when it comes, only deepens it. Now I want to give you something practical. Because understanding this intellectually is one thing. But being able to see it while you're inside it is an entirely different skill, and it's one that can be developed. There's a concept in cognitive psychology sometimes referred to as decentering, and it's the ability to step outside your own perspective and observe your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors the way a neutral third party would. Therapists use it. Mindfulness practitioners build it. And it is genuinely one of the most protective tools you can develop when it comes to relational dynamics. Here's how to apply it. The next time you're in a relationship or connection that feels intense, especially one that feels unusually fast, unusually deep, unusually us against the world, I want you to try something. Imagine you are watching yourself in a film. You are the audience, not the protagonist. And as you watch, you ask yourself the questions a thoughtful viewer would ask. Is the pace of this relationship unusual? Not wrong, just unusual. In the first few weeks, how much has been shared? How heavy has the emotional content been? Would someone watching from the outside describe this as a connection that developed or as a connection that was installed? Has the narrative of the relationship started to separate it from the rest of your life? Does talking about other people feel disloyal? Have you found yourself defending the relationship more than you've been able to simply enjoy it? Have you been assigned a special role, the only person who truly understands, the one who can finally help them heal? And does that role come with a particular kind of weight? These questions are not accusations. They are observations. The goal isn't to manufacture doubt where there is none. The goal is to interrupt the automaticity, to create just enough space between your experience and your reaction to it that you can actually choose, consciously, how to proceed. Here's something worth sitting with. Most of the people who end up in damaging relationships are not naive. They're not weak. They are often deeply empathetic, emotionally intelligent, and genuinely loving. Those are not vulnerabilities. They're strengths, and they're also the entry points that certain dynamics exploit. Your capacity to hold someone else's pain. Your desire to be the person who doesn't give up on someone. Your belief that love requires sacrifice and effort. None of those things are wrong. But they can be recruited into a story that isn't actually good for you. The observer's eye, that third-party perspective, isn't about being cold or calculating. It's about being honest. It's about asking, with real gentleness toward yourself, what am I actually watching here? What would I say to a friend who described this dynamic to me? Because often, that's the clearest signal of all. When you hear yourself telling the story of a relationship, really telling it out loud to someone you trust, and you watch their expression shift just slightly, that's information. The part of you that edits the story before you tell it, the part that braces for concern, the part that preemptively defends, that part knows something. And it's worth listening to. The quiet red flags are quiet because they arrive in the costume of everything you've always wanted. The sense of being known. The relief of being chosen. The excitement of a love that feels singular and urgent and alive. These feelings are real. I want to be clear about that. They are real. They just aren't always evidence of what we think they're evidence of. Learning to read the early architecture of a relationship, the pace, the narrative, the role you've been assigned within it, is not cynicism. It is care. It is the kind of attentiveness that you almost certainly extend to the people you love most, turned, for once, on yourself. So the next time something feels electric and overwhelming and almost too perfectly fitting, just pause for a moment. Step into the audience seat. Watch the film. Ask the honest questions. Not because something is definitely wrong, but because you are worth that kind of attention, that kind of slowness, that kind of care. You deserve a love that doesn't need to rush, that doesn't need to separate you from your life, that can exist in the daylight, among all the people who know you, and still feel like enough.